Hello, sisters, and welcome to Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy my conversation with Traca Savadogo as she shares about how her boyfriend encouraged her to go travel solo because he was sick of hearing about how much she wanted to get to Europe.
Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean go solo live? Have you ever been asked why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Traca Savadogo, and she's going to share some of her solo travel stories, and her energy is just palpable. So I can't wait to get you started with her amazing journeys. Welcome, Traca.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
So we're going to dig right in because I want to hear, how did you even get started doing the solo travel? And before you tell me the nitty gritties of the where and the when, like what was going on in your life? How old were you? What was life like at the time?
So solo travel in high school, I used to dip school all the time, and I lived in Peoria, which at the time seemed incredibly boring in the middle of nowhere. And so I would dip school and go to Chicago or St. Louis and spend 3 hours in the city and then turn around and drive the 3 hours back and make it home before my mom got home from work. And and of course I was at school, Mom. I don't understand why you don't recognize this shopping bag from Bloomingdale's. There's one at the mall. You've never seen it? And my family in the Midwest, driving on trips is a really big central part of that culture. And my dad was a traveling salesman, so he would travel by car a lot. So we would drive 12 to 18 hours to Florida, or we would drive to Michigan. My family's from Michigan. My parents are from Michigan, so we would summer up there. So driving was always a really big part of the culture, but flying was not. And so I moved to Seattle when I was 24, and that's when I realized Rick Steves was here, very close to Seattle where I'm based, and I would attend his free lectures all the time and try and learn as much as possible. But I always felt that traveling abroad was what other people did and never really was a possibility for me. But I had a boyfriend at the time who worked at Microsoft, and he said one day, he's like, look, I can't hear you talking about this anymore. I'll make you a deal. I'll buy you a ticket to Europe. You buy your rail pass, because, I could buy an unlimited rail pass before I was 25 or, at that cutoff point. And so he's like, just go. And I have to work, but I'll make you a deal. I'll buy your plane ticket if you go and you keep really good notes and I read your journal when you get back. And so that was the deal.
That's amazing. So I want to hear a little bit about you just in Seattle. So you moved from the Midwest, and I'm a Midwest girl.
Yes.
So, that's always like, oh my gosh, you moved from Midwest to the coast. Like for some of you who live on the coast, you might not realize what a big deal that is, but it can be a big deal, especially it's not like you're moving from Chicago to another major urban area. You're moving from Peoria, Illinois.
Right.
So you get to Seattle, you're exploring, you have a boyfriend, life is good, life is grand, and then you find Rick Steves. Do you remember that first Rick Steves that you went to and what it was about?
Actually, there's a guy that he works with a lot. His name is also Steve, and he specializes in France. And I went to a free talk that he gave at the library, and I drove, 4 or 5 cities over in order to attend this talk. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so amazing. The world of possibilities just opened up to me. And then to be in a room full of people that had already been, and it wasn't their first time. They were really trying to dial in on more information. And what would it be like if you rented a houseboat and went down the river? And have you ever done that? And who do you have contacts with over there? And the questions that they asked were jaw-dropping for me. And so then that's what just spurred me going to a ton of different ones. And then Rick Steves, he did this, he would rent out a movie theater during the day and have these talks. But I would drive, 45 minutes just to go to those talks. And they were free, and I'd go to lunch, and then I'd pick up another one in the afternoon. And I just think that was my way of just getting comfortable with the idea. It was so foreign to me. It was so alien to even think about that. My mom thinks that when I lived in Illinois, I grew up in Peoria, but at one point I was working in Springfield, which is about an hour and a half away. And for my mom, that is just a heroic trip. She just can't even imagine going any further than that. And so in my family, my dad has wanderlust, but he never wanted to leave the United States. And so I just didn't realize that's what people did. Some people,
And that's exactly it, is that, there's a lot of homeostasis in the Midwest. And
right.
And there's also a lot of the U.S. to explore. When I travel abroad, a lot of people will comment on, almost like the egocentric American who only feels like they need to explore America. And I hear that, and I honor that. There is something to that. But like, my boyfriend lives in Belgium, and to say, well, honey, your whole country is smaller than my state.
Right.
So I think there's also that idea of, so if they want to go, like us driving to Florida is like them driving to the south of France.
For sure.
It's a very different...
and they encounter other people that travel all the time. Be exposed to other languages, even other television channels and things in other languages, that's part of the norm there, especially in Europe. But that was so I could go for days and never meet somebody that spoke another language in the Midwest.
Exactly. And it's not
right.
because we didn't want to, it's just that we didn't even really know that it was possible. Especially, what year are we talking about here? When were you, in your 20s?
Yeah, this was like in the 90s, like mid 90s. Mm-hmm. And I think that the thing for me too is that, my grandmother sent us an annual subscription to National Geographic, and that magazine would come in, and I wanted to meet those people. And I feel that for some people, it's, like I want to engage with the medium, and I want to have that experience myself. But I think a lot of people, I didn't realize that a lot of people are content just to watch, instead of inserting themselves in the conversation, they're content to be on the outside of the conversation. So, even when I was growing up, and like say the television show Dallas was really popular, I wanted to be like them. And how do I become like them? How do I get in the family? And I just didn't realize that this passive thing of watching it was contentment for other people. And that was enough. And it never was enough for me. And so the fact that when I realized that I could insert myself in the conversation, that was a game changer for me, for sure.
Absolutely. Nope. It makes a huge difference. So I just, again, for the listeners, I know people are coming from all different places, and part of the journey that we're going on when we do this solo travel is not just about where we go. It's about where did we even start? And so being in that place of, I'm a small town Midwestern girl, and then I moved to Seattle. Like, there's a big deal there. And then you started to see a whole lot of the world, and you were supported and encouraged to do more. Okay.
Yeah, that was a really big part of it. And I think too, Seattle was a game changer. I remember my boyfriend, he got takeout one day, and he was eating pad thai. And I was just like, oh, that looks so gross. What are you eating? That's so gross. And he said, well, it's noodles and fish sauce. And I was just out of my mind. I was like, you cannot kiss me. You have to brush your teeth 12 times. Like, no. And now Thai food is my favorite thing. But I love that you're going back to the Midwest example, because it was so foreign to me at the time that, I mean, and to think about, like, you know what, at 25, if I live to be 100, that's a quarter of my life I spent never being exposed to how much. I mean, this is stuff I take for granted now, but, just the simple relocation just opened my eyes to everything. And I love that you're bringing up what a game changer coming to Seattle was, because early on when I moved out here, I befriended this guy he was also from the Midwest, and we would go to the Pike Place Market or Chinatown, or we just drive around randomly, like joyriding almost. But we both would take like $20 in our pocket, and we made a deal. We would buy or stop or try anything that came on our radar at the time. So whether it would be, going to the ice skating rink in the middle of the summer, to trying anything that looked interesting or weird that you've never eaten before, like a kumquat or whatever at the Pike Place Market. I had a cohort that was a we just made that pact to explore. And, so that was a really big deal. And also at home, the guy that I moved out here for, he was from the Midwest, but he had been out here significantly longer than me. And he worked at Microsoft, which is a microcosm of a lot of international exposure. And so he basically helped, ease that transition and encouraged it.
But again, what you're talking about right there is the ability to travel solo and to explore and experiment in your own backyard, where you're still feeling like safe and supported. And that is awesome. But again, those of us who grew up in the Midwest, we didn't have that same range of possibility of experiences. And when I look at people raising kids right now who are able to give them so many things so early, part of me says that's the way that we're going to get to the moon, is because these kids are going to have done everything cool in the US or in the world. And so they're going to be like, well, we better go explore outer space because we're done here. Like, we've been there, done it.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I interviewed a woman just last summer that when she turned 10, her parents they had a plan and they pulled her out of school and they went sailing down the coast, like through the Intercoastal Highway, all the way down through Central America, and then came back, and she homeschooled that whole trip. And to have that happen to you when you're 10, I mean, that changed her. Now she can't stand to work in an office.
There is that. It is truly a game changer for people. So, okay, So we've set the stage. And again, what's nice to think about is you already had that sense of adventure back, when you were exploring St. Louis and Chicago and living at home. So it was already there. It was building. You had some sense of like, I need to get out. So
right.
You land you do go to Springfield, then you land in Seattle. And now you're being encouraged to go to Europe. Mm-hmm. When does this happen? How old are you? Where did you start? Like, how much planning did you do? Give me the skinny.
Oh my God. That whole thing was hilarious. Well, first of all, before I left Illinois, I had a friend of mine she had the membership book for Hosteling International in America. And even though I never used my membership, I got the book. I became a member and I got the free book at the time. And so I would just highlight all these places around the world, around the United States. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And I would just use it as daydream fodder. And so then she also told me there was a place, it's kind of like Service. I'm not sure if it's still in existence anymore, but it was called at the time Hospitality Exchange. And what that was a mailing list that you could get on, and basically you had like a little bio about yourself and where you lived, and that you were either a traveler or willing to host other travelers where you are. And I got on that list, and I think I paid like $25 a year or something, and I got the book. And the point is to get in the book so that when you traveled, you could say, hey, listen, I'm in the book, and you can read my bio there. And so that's what I did. And so I was laying the foundation for all this stuff. I never thought it was just daydream fodder at the time. I never even thought I'd go.
So it's like early version of Airbnb.
You know what? Service is, it was, but it's free. And it's basically travelers helping other travelers.
Awesome.
So yeah. And so even when I was in Seattle, we hosted a couple people. I hosted a Swami on his way to a retreat to Vancouver. I've hosted a guy who was on tour with Cirque du Soleil, who was going to be in town for 6 weeks. Yeah, and so even though I'm not traveling, I can bring other travelers into my orbit that way.
Sure.
And for me, that was a win. And so anyway, so let's see. When I found out I was going, I freaked out because at the time I didn't even know what countries were adjacent to each other. It just was never even a consideration that I never even thought I would use this information. And so I left for a month-long Eurail trip with 5 people that I had pen palled to stay at their house through this organization that I had never met before. Rick Steve says you can sleep on a train. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then I had my rail pass and I could go anywhere I wanted to. And I laughed, and I'd never taken public transportation before. I'd never dealt with any other currency. So I think naivete was definitely on my side. But the first place I landed was a woman and her husband owned a B&B in Amsterdam, and they had traveled through this organization that I was now a part of throughout the United States. And so because Amsterdam's a big popular hub, so they would host a lot of people. And so I stayed with them. And the wonderful thing about that was not only did they have a B&B above their unit, they had also bought some real estate in Amsterdam. So we went and looked at some properties, and she said, okay, but also because she was a Airbnb or a B&B host, she'd say, okay, well, I'm going to get breakfast ready, but while you're doing that, a really great walk would be to go out the door to the left, that kind of stuff, right? And then she also was really helpful in saying, okay, well, where are you going next? Well, I'm supposed to be staying with this guy in Berlin. She's like, do you think you should call him? I'm like, yeah, I probably can, but I don't know how. And so, there was these people that would provide assistance along the way. And when I got to Berlin, the signs were in German. I had studied French, and so I couldn't understand how to even get to him. And so I arrived somewhat late at night. It was already dark, and I called him and I said, can you come get me? And he's like, okay, it'll be an hour. So I got to, shower and change and leave. And he came to the train station, and I'm sitting there with my pack, just waiting, helpless. And he comes, and we go, and we're on the train on the way back to his house. And this was a year or two after the wall fell. And he was living in a rent-controlled apartment in Berlin. And he said to me, I want you to know I have your bath ready for you. And I was like, well, what do you think this is?
I suppose you needed hot water?
It turned out that it was a coal-heated hot water tank because he was living in a rent-controlled apartment, and it was old. And he had taken the time to heat the entire thing for me to be able to take a bath when I got back to his house.
That is awesome.
I had no idea.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Things you don't think about until you get there and you only have the option of a cold bath.
Right. I didn't even know that was a thing, And so anyway, from that moment on, my plans completely changed. I hung out with him and his friend, and we went on side trips, and I just had a loose idea of where I was going, and, I had no idea. So anyway, I traveled around Europe. I wound up I traveled with, when I was in Czechoslovakia and Prague, I met up with Salzburg, I met up with a group of students from Italy who were on tour for a school trip, and I snagged the last bed in a hostel that was completely overtaken by these Italian students.
No.
And hung out with them for the whole trip because I didn't know where I was going, but their professor did. So I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to hang out with you. And, let them do the heavy lifting on where we're going. And so that was great. And, then I landed in Italy. Yeah. So I wound up meeting this guy who, it was funny because I took some time to journal, and I was hanging out at this little cafe having a glass of wine and just writing in my journal. And I'd already eaten, and then this guy hit on me, and he turned out he was a banker from Switzerland living in China, trading gold on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And he's like, would you like to go have dinner? I had already eaten, but I was so tired of living on a budget that I was like, yes, let's go.
Sometimes you just have to say yes.
Yeah. So it was great, just being open to those opportunities and gaining confidence as you go along. And I think my journaling turned out to be a really good thing too, because I could write down all of my impressions, even if I didn't have somebody to talk to. I just poured it all into my journal, and sometimes I would take like the whole morning to journal instead of go running around town. And for me, that was okay. I gave myself permission to relax when I needed to, and, change plans whenever I wanted to, because I wasn't beholden to anybody. And my favorite thing is, by the time I had gotten to the place that I was staying at, there was a woman I was staying with in Brussels, and she was an attorney for the then not yet formed EU. And she totally understood traveling, and she was also through that organization that I was a part of, and she had traveled all over Australia with that. And she just handed me the keys to her apartment and said, throw it under the mat when you're done. If you can do laundry, do whatever. So, I took a bath, I did laundry, I never even left her house. She was supposed to come home at 5 o'clock. I left like minutes before she was supposed to come home.
Sure.
Sometimes those little creature comforts are the thing you need to restore your soul on the road. And yeah, that was good.
The making friends, I believe that one of my favorite things to talk about is how you're only as alone as you want to be when you're traveling solo.
Right.
And you had, even in this stranger's house, or, in these other situations, you had alone time. You had options to choose to be alone. And then you actually chose to dive in, and get engaged.
Yeah.
And then there were benefits.
I think yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that, even if I'm traveling solo, at home, you navigate your life, you go to the mall by yourself or whatever. So, but I think that even traveling works the same way. Like, I'm never really alone. Like, I can strike up conversation wherever I go, whether it be at the restaurant or a market or whatever. And I'm actually really glad that I traveled before I had access to technology to make that easier, because then I wasn't tied to the people at home during my journey. We made this arrangement with the guy that I was dating at the time, call me if you have a problem, but, no news is good news. And so it wasn't like I was calling home every day trying to stay one foot in at home while I'm abroad. And I think now even I still don't travel with my technology very, very, I shut it off because I knew what a pleasure that was to just be totally immersed in that culture of wherever I'm going. And so I think that for me, that alone time or not alone time, the beauty of that is when I'm traveling solo is that's completely your choice. So my first big trip abroad, I went with somebody, or I went by myself, but then, and I had some stuff lined up along the way, but very loosely. Like I'd roll into town and I had no plans. If I didn't have people I was staying with, I didn't know where I was going. And I didn't realize how odd that was, but now I do that all the time. And some people, the idea of planning your trip from top to bottom every day, just I like, why bother going? Because I love leaving room for that serendipity. But I think that, and my next trip after that, my friend, she tells the story and I totally forgot about it. But anyway, I had a break in college, so I went back to college as an adult. So, when I got back from Europe, I went back and got my degree. And, anyway, so I had a break and, I called a travel agency, like one of the youth travel companies. And I just said, what do you have cheap between, this date in September and this date? And she threw out a couple destinations, and one of them was Thailand. And I said, okay, can you book 2 tickets, put them on 24-hour hold, and I'll call you back. And so I put my friend's name down on there, and I called her. I said, look, I got a really great airfare, and there's a ticket waiting for you. Let's go.
And how does she take it?
Yeah, she's much more conservative than I am. And she got off the phone with me and told her dad what I did. And her dad's like, go, what are you waiting for? And so we went and we traveled Thailand for a month. And that was like during the Asian economic collapse. So we had a layover, like a 36-hour layover in Seoul, Korea on the way back. And they gave us the hotel room for free and meal vouchers, and we took a tour of the city. And so we were able to do Thailand for a month. And this friend of mine, we met in a scuba diving class. So, we did mountain trekking and then did diving in the islands and did all that kind of stuff. So we were together, but because I had solo traveled, we went with somebody else too. He came along just for the ride, to get over there. And wound up staying with us for a while. And I was like, look, before we leave, let's just make an arrangement that, I don't want to travel and use up time if we're angsty together.
Yeah.
If it's not working, like, let's just split up for a few days and agree to meet a couple days later. Or you can go on the trip solo the rest of the way yourself, let's just have this agreement before we ever leave that, I'm cool if you want to go on your own and if something happens. And that's the guy that was traveling with us. That's what we did. He was kind of a mooch, and we just got really fed up with him. So I took the guidebook that I had and I tore it in half and I gave it to him. And I'm like, gotta go, dude. And I since have run into him, and he was like, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. He did far more than we did, and it was so fun. I think it was just, he was using us as a crutch for a long time, and then it liberated him. He's like, oh crap, I gotta go. And he had plenty of money, so it wasn't that. But yeah, he just needed that little shove, and we definitely needed to give him a shove, because it was like, he was putting a damper on our trip. But it's interesting how things like that turn out, and it turns out to be like the best thing that it could ever happen for everybody, So
wow.
Yeah.
Right? That's impressive.
Yeah. Somehow. And, I'll tell you, one of the things that I tell other travelers that we wound up doing in that trip that I think was brilliant was, even if you're traveling with somebody, I don't even know where I picked up this tip, but basically we're all eating at the same place. We're going to the same places. We're doing the same thing. So we made an arrangement that we bought this little, coin purse or whatever in Thailand. And we each would put money in there, the same amount of money. So each person put $50 or $100 or whatever in the local equivalent in there. And then somebody was the banker out of that pouch. And so they would pay for the meal. They would pay for whatever we were all doing collectively. And then if you wanted anything else, so we weren't having to split the bill every single time a bill came. And that turned out to be a really good stroke of genius, because it wasn't stressful every time we went out for dinner, or just those little, every time we took a tuk-tuk, or any of that transportation kind of stuff. That was it's all coming out of the same pool of money. So,
it makes sense.
Yeah, it was great.
Easy. Yeah. Again, like a couple of those things that you've talked about, I want to spend another minute on.
Sure.
Even, the idea of, I'm all about setting some ground rules. I'm pretty much like, let's anticipate the worst thing that could happen. And as a snorer, That's one of the things, like when you're sharing space with somebody, be like, look, I'm going to snore. Well, is this, do you know that you can work with it or not? Like, let's talk about that now. Because what I don't want is you to be cranky because you haven't been getting sleep, and that becomes a tension issue. So I'm all about, like, let's have those conversations up front. The idea that you guys were able to say, this is how we're going to handle situations if they don't work out. We're willing to go alone if needed, split up, and then come back together. Negotiating money when traveling can be a big challenge. So you came up with some solutions for that in advance. Like, those are things that just make sense for people to spend some time addressing. In the moment, they can be stressful. If you have the conversation in advance, it's just like, oh yeah, we talked about that. We're good.
Right. Yeah. It was really good. To be able to have that. I still kind of marvel at myself sometimes that we actually came up with that. I don't know where it came from or whatever, but seeing it in practice, it was really lovely. So I'm really happy that we came up with those kind of things. So
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, the feeling that you had as you were deciding to go on your next trip and you were inviting somebody to go with you. So you've just done a lot of stuff solo, because I think some people get to the point of, oh, I've traveled solo and it's all I want to do. So how did you create a more well-rounded, like, I want the best of all the worlds, because we can have it?
I think that it's the right travel partner is also important. My friend Allison and I, like, she's super amiable. But we also have a lot of the same interests, and we would spend time locally even doing things. Like I said, we were scuba divers, and so, we would day trip to go diving places, and she's just really easygoing. So that was an advantage for sure. But then also, I think because I had done solo stuff, if she wanted to do something and I didn't have a problem with her going and doing it. So at one point we were in northern Thailand, and we had a big discussion about, she wanted to go elephant trekking. It was, I don't know, 6 times my daily budget just to go elephant trekking.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, does this have to happen now, or can I do it some other point in my life? And, I was resistant all the way up until the morning that she left. And she was like, listen, this is really important to me. I'm going to go. And I was like, well, I don't want to go. I don't want to spend that kind of money. And so she was like, okay, well, I'm going to go. And I'm like, yes, please go. And then I changed my mind, and it turned out to be a fabulous trip. And I was really glad. So in a way, I think that she encouraged me to do something that I probably wouldn't have done on my own, just because at the time I wasn't even interested in that. And but knowing that I had that option and we had made that arrangement beforehand, she's like, are you sure? Are you sure? I kind of think I know you, and I think you might like this after all. And it turned out great. I mean, it's like, that's one of my, if you're hanging out with travelers, sitting around telling tales, my part of that tale is like, I had a baby elephant and I was riding it all by myself, and the elephant would like exert itself going up a mountaintop and snot all into my like Tiva. And, I'm like, y'all know what elephant snot is like?
Oh my God. I don't want to. No, thank you. You keep that good old feeling to yourself.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, and so that was really cool, and it was also like, she provided that stability for me too. There were moments so I met I meet tons of people. That's part of, like, I'm the ringer. I'll go out and meet everybody. That's fine. And so we were at this cafe, and we had met this expat who started a tour business while he was in Thailand and married to a Thai woman. And she's like, hey, what about that? You want to do that? And so we hired this guy to travel us around and take us to a bunch of different temples and stuff. And he picked us up at our guest house in a pickup truck with like Thai silk pillows all in the flatbed of the truck. And it was hilarious. And she was the one who was like, yeah, let's do it. And so again, that's something that one-on-one, I don't know that I would have gone out with that guy all day solo. I did the next time I went to Thailand, I hired somebody, and that made me a lot more confident. But at the time, I don't know, there was decisions that like I wouldn't have made had I not been with her. But it was really interesting because, how two photographers standing next to each other, because of what they bring to the actual act of taking a photo, their pictures are totally different. And what she experienced on a trip and what I experienced on a trip, we've come back and they were two totally different things. And I'm like, really? I didn't see it like that at all. And so that was an advantage that I didn't have when I was traveling solo too. And even going through her photos, like her photos versus my photos when we got back, it was like, what? I don't remember that at all. But yeah, so, and also I think she was very mindful of the fact that I was more people oriented. She was really respectful of the fact that I like quiet time. So she would go to the market while I sat and had coffee and journaled. And I was really into history too. So at one point, and she was kind of game for anything. So when we were with this travel guide, or this guy that was touring us around, we went into the DMZ, between the demilitarized zone between, at the time there was a turf war between Cambodia and Thailand.
Okay.
And this guy took us to a military base, and we went hiking through the jungle with him in that demilitarized zone, and would go up to, there was like a shelling shelter that had been blown up by bullets. And I was like, well, when did that happen? He's like, that was last week.
Wow.
But it gave me comfort to go, to push my boundaries a little bit because I was with her,
Right.
and like, okay, if something happened.
Wow. So it sounds like
yeah.
there was a very good balance, but how much had you traveled with this person before you went? What was your experience?
None. Just day trips.
So no travel, day trips. And
Yeah.
how close were you guys in terms of being friends? How long have you been friends? Or
we were pretty good friends. We don't see each other all that often because she's super busy and deeply entrenched in her own family. And so,
Sure.
I don't know. I think it was more, I think I hit the jackpot just because she's just easygoing, and kind of up for anything. And so, yeah, that was good. Then, when I came back, I would say that I traveled with that boyfriend of mine that was reluctant to travel in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that really sucked, so I've seen both sides of that, where he's like super introverted and all he wanted to do was sit under a palm tree and read the whole time. And I wanted to go snorkeling and go meet people and go to the market. And he's just like, no. And I wanted a shared experience, but the experience that he was looking for was definitely more sipping cocktails on the beach. And, I brought 5 books with me and I plan on reading all of them before we get out of here.
Sure.
And,
So he knew himself well enough to know that this was not the right thing. He really should not be traveling solo or traveling with you.
Well, and I think it's really kind of interesting because he, I think it was his first time doing something like that. And since then he's kind of flipped the switch. So, after we broke up, it turns out that he goes to Mexico all the time and travel. I'm like, are you kidding me? Or I would talk to his friends and they would, and after he got back and they're like, oh my God, I heard you had the most amazing time in Mexico. And I'm like, that's his story. Like, really? I was having such a challenge just trying to get him to do anything, but it's like, I don't know. Now that was many years ago. And so now I'd be a lot more mindful of that. And, I kind of forgot that he was the one who encouraged me to go travel on my own. So, at the time I was so insistent on having a shared experience, but I didn't really even consider the fact that he would be totally fine if I went off and, went to Chichen Itza or something all by myself and then came back with him and rendezvoused like a couple days later. It never really even occurred to me to do that.
Sure.
But now it certainly would.
So what's next on the horizon for you in the realm of travel?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Do other people have a list that they keep constantly updating?
That's actually a fabulous question because that's not me. That is not my way
What?
of deciding. So I'm curious, for others who do, I'm like, oh, I'm an opportunistic traveler. Like when the opportunity to go somewhere arises, then I'll be like, yeah. Otherwise, I'm like, what? I just wait and see what comes to me.
I think I'm like that too, but I have probably I don't know, maybe a list of 8 or 10 places that I'd like to go, and they're kind of a little bit on my radar. So if an article pops up in my feed about that, I'm super excited to read about it. And then, if a wild hair comes up and I spot a good airfare on the right day, I'll book it, right? But
Awesome.
I like to know what my options are. I think too, why I travel has changed a lot over time and what I hope to get out of it. Before, I think I wouldn't say I was necessarily focused on hitting landmark, things to see. But I'm definitely much more people focused, and I'm part of a traveler group, and they think it's totally bizarre that I use social media to meet people in other countries. And I think that it was a really good eye-opening experience for me to have my first travel experience broke as heck in traveling to meet other people and staying with them to try and cheapen my lodging, that Airbnb without having to pay for the Airbnb experience.
Sure.
But now my travel is really focused on who do I want to meet, who's doing really interesting things there, it has way less to do with what are the major milestone things to see in that area. I'm going there for people and to peel back the layer of who's even there. So say for instance, trying to think of an example. So I'm looking at Israel. I know there's a blogger that I know that she broke it up into chunks, but she did the Israel National Trail with her family. And I always thought that was really interesting. And since then I've become part of an organization called Startup Grind, and Startup Grind is global. And Israel is also one of the startup capitals of the world. And so I'm following the people that speak at Startup Grinds throughout Israel and saying, okay, listen, can I get a meeting with them? Because I have meetings with people here in Seattle that are doing that kind of stuff. Or I'm also deeply involved with, this year I'm interviewing all of the speakers for TEDx Seattle. And
wow.
So, 2 of the top 10 TED Talks of all time came from Seattle. And this year I have the opportunity to interview all of the speakers. And so now I'm also curious about how to, so I get access to people who are doing really amazing things. And so can I see what it is that you're doing? Can I learn more? Can I have an opportunity to tour your facility? I'd love to chat with you. That has become a really central focus for me. And I'll tell you, when I was, to riff on that, I was at a hostel in Arizona, and I wound up meeting a guy. We were bonding over making waffles at the free breakfast in a hostel. And it turns out he was there for a conference and then had to travel on his own dime. So that's why he moved from the $400 a night hotel to the hostel. And between going to different speaking gigs. And so we met. And it turns out that he was he still is a nuclear particle physicist working on the Hadron Collider at CERN, where they were, they did the experiment to find the God particle and the origin of life. And so he's a big deal working on that. And since then we started dating, and he turned out he got his PhD in Seattle, so he has a house here. Even though he lives in France and Switzerland. But part of what he does is he's part of an organization called IEEE, and he travels around the world doing speaking opportunities. And one of the things that I always thought was really cool about his story is wherever he is, he'll often drop by universities to pop in at the lab and see what people are working on. So he'll just walk in to the building and then stick his head in somewhere and say, hey, what are you working on? And then they find out who he is. And by the next day, they're having a reception for him and, just rolling out the red carpet. But, for him, it's just a spontaneous thing where the advantage for him is that he's always up on the latest research and he's made contacts like everywhere he goes. And and then because they roll out the red carpet for him usually later, or he'll go out for drinks with them or something like that, it's a deep honor to know him as well. And, but that idea of just using that opportunity to engage with the people that are relevant to the things that you're interested in another city and proactively seeking them out, like even just walking into the university, to me, that's always been a really big game changer for the way that I travel. And it's as I've evolved over time, that's, so I'll do I used to travel down to San Francisco quite a bit, and I would do meetups when I was down there. Say, hey, everybody, I'm going to be here. Anybody want to get together? Or I'm directionally challenged still, and I don't I'll have 5 things that I want to do in a city, and I don't really know where to go. And so sometimes I'll use my Twitter following, and I'll say, hey, anybody want to hang out with me for the day? And can you be my escort? And I did that in San Francisco a couple years ago. And this woman, she met me at the airport. I had a couple speaking gigs. I had some things I wanted to check out. She planned I said, I want to do these 5 things, and I got to be here at 6 o'clock. And she's like, okay. She planned my whole day, like how we were getting around, all the public transportation, like everything. And then I got her access to a huge amount of opportunities that she would have never had access to. It was a win-win for both people. And I wound up getting a hotel comp for the night, and she stayed with me, and we've just stayed friends over the years. So that was really kind of an interesting way to go about using travel and traveling solo, even if I didn't want to. How do I work around that? And so I use my Twitter following for meeting up with people or talking to people and engaging in other places that I'm curious about. So
fantastic. Well, I want to make sure that you get a chance to share with people a little bit about what you do for work, or how people could connect with you, follow you, become part of your Twitter following, things like that.
You can find me on Twitter. I used to run a food and travel blog called Seattle Tall Poppy. And so on Twitter, my handle is Seattle Tall Pop. I didn't have room for the Y, but it's Seattle Tall, POPP. And that's probably the best place. And then I migrate folks. If we have a really great discussion, oftentimes I'll just migrate them over to my private Facebook page. But Twitter's the best place to start. And I love hearing about other people's travels and what they're up to. And I especially love questions. And so if there's anybody that's kind of stuck and they're looking for that little push out the door, an opportunity, or even if you're coming to Seattle, I love meeting people from everywhere. Or even if you want to jump on a call, I love doing stuff like this. So this is great.
Well, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share your stories with us today. And I feel like we've just hit the tip of the iceberg. So who knows what stories we may have to hear from you next, or certainly following you on Twitter is a way to stay connected with that. It's a great vibe, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Traca shared with us today? It's important to remember that you are only as alone as you want to be when you're traveling. You can choose to engage, you can choose to do things on your own. That choice is up to you. If you love these stories and want to help support Go Solo Live, you can do that by making a small financial contribution to the show. There are a lot of great options with some gifts of appreciation. Just go to www.patreon.com. That's Patreon.com/Go Solo Live to show the love. We've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Follow us on Twitter at Go Solo Live. And remember, share this with your friends if you think that they'd enjoy hearing the solo travel stories that we're sharing. Until next time, remember, go solo, not alone.